If she had only been ugly, we would still be together.
Look, Tom, we have to start, all right? So I'm just going to do the thing. We'll start.
Start what?
We're going to start the show.
What
that you
show?
came here. Well, it's going to be a show when we talk. You know what we're going to do? You know we usually talk, and then it's not a show?
Yeah.
We do the same thing, but it's a show.
Oh. You mean hanging out?
Yeah, hanging out.
We're going to hang out. Oh, good. I like that.
But hopefully we're wittier than most normal people. That's why we have the show. Good morning, good afternoon. Tom Irrera, live from the Laugh Factory. How are you? Good to see you. Tom Dreesen, love him. Great to have you on the show, Tom.
Buddy.
How are you? Thank you. You're such a pro. First of all, you come dressed up. You're not like Russell Peters, that mook, that fine feathered friend of mine. You come on time. It's unbelievable. You got it.
That's it. That's. I was trained that way in the service.
You're a pro.
Yeah.
Do you hate being called a legend?
I appreciate it. You know, I appreciate it, but it also, I always say whenever they say, you know, like the young comedians introduce me, he's a legend. I always think you're getting closer to the coffin when they call you a legend.
Yeah, one day closer. I mean, I think Rodney's a legend. We're like working comedians that have had great and lucky careers, you know.
Yes,
I don't want to be called a legend.
Yeah.
I just want to know how you felt about it, you know.
Well, the other part of it is that this is my 45th year in show business.
Wow.
My 45th year as a stand-up comedian, and I've been working all those years, and so I'm happy that I'm still working. You know,
You'll always work.
I hope.
I mean, the thing is, the other night we were on. Remember, we went back to back on a show, and Sean Penn and David Spade and those guys were here. And I was watching the kids laugh at you, and I thought, how cool is this that we got like these 19-year-old Asian UCLA students, females, laughing at you and me.
Yeah.
Two Goombas from Chicago and Philly.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
I think, first of all, that says a lot for your stand-up, because a lot of stand-up comedians try to, they'll say, I'm only good for African-American audiences, or I can only do Jews down in Miami, or I can only, I'm from South Philly, so I can only, they relate to me in South Philly. A stand-up comedian has to, you hope that your material relates to everybody.
Yeah.
And so we get that challenge every time you come to the Laugh Factory or one of the young comedy clubs in America, and you get up and do 20 minutes trying out some new material, and they got young African-American, young Latino, young white, young black, and they're all laughing. That means we're staying in the mainstream.
I know. Because I like a mixed audience better than anything.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I don't want it stacked in my favor. I don't want all Goombas my age. I love them. But I don't, hey, yo, Dom, that's funny. All right. Now tell me your background, Tom, because your name is Dreesen, which is not an Italian name, but you're Italian.
My biological father was named Frank Polizzi. He was a Sicilian, and my mother was full-blooded Irish. And that's who I, you know.
That's a good mix.
Yeah, I'm Irish-Italian, yeah.
That's what we have in our family.
Yeah.
We don't talk about the German. We got one German. I don't know how he slipped in.
So but I think that sometimes I always think that I relate more to the Italian. I've always felt more Italian.
Well, you seem more Italian.
Yeah.
You don't drink as much as the Irish one.
Well, but I did. I was like every other guy. I mean, when I drank a lot and I was in the service, I drank all the time. And then I came out of the service, and I was married, I had kids, and I'd go to the bars with the guys on Friday night hanging out. Friday night, as you know, is gumad night.
Yeah.
That's an Italian expression.
That's when they take the girlfriends out on Friday, and then Saturday night they dress the wives up.
Well, you've seen the movie Goodfellas.
Yeah.
That's what Ray Liotta was always narrating, that Friday night was gumad night. That's for the non-Italian audience, gumadi. If you're an Italian and you have a girlfriend, she's your girlfriend. But if you're married and you have a girlfriend, she's your gumad.
Right.
And then there's a million jokes on that. December 23rd is gumad, Christmas Eve.
Oh, right.
And all that stuff. But anyhow. So when I think about it, sometimes the Irish were the great storytellers.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe I get some of that. I'd rather be a storytelling comedian than a stand-up rat-a-tat-tat comic.
Sure. Well, you can do both.
Yeah. But we had to keep in mind when I first started doing. I always liked storytellers. But show business being as it was, when we first started out, everywhere you went in America, people say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. The next question out of their mouth is, oh, yeah? You ever been on Johnny Carson?
Right.
If you hadn't been on Johnny Carson, well, then they didn't think you were a comedian.
That was the imprimatur.
Yeah. Now, how do you get on Johnny Carson? I'd watch that show, and those comics, you couldn't, 1 minute.
No, you can converse a little more when you got to the couch, but you couldn't converse on.
On a stand-up,
Bill Cosby could.
yeah, but Bill could make a story. He could tell you about a cab ride he took, and he'd have you laughing just describing the cab driver and the wind blowing in the cab or whatever. But those comics, 60 seconds on television without a laugh was an eternity. So you
It's a pretty long time even on stage. I mean, unless you're really building to something interesting.
So that's what I had to learn how to do. I had to learn how to. I used to get 22 to 26 laughs in my 5-minute routine on the Tonight Show.
Really, you counted them?
I had have to, because then I knew the bit was working. You know, I did, as you know, 61 appearances on the Tonight Show. Every time you did a Tonight Show, you had to do a new 5 minutes. So I was
61
constantly.
61 appearances. It's unbelievable that you could write that much material.
But you had to keep coming. And Johnny didn't want you doing two guys going to a bar joke. You know, you had to. You know, I did 50 with Johnny, 11 with Jay. But
who do you think was better, Jay or Johnny?
Depending on what your style
I'm
is,
kidding.
I thought Johnny Carson was. I've always thought Johnny Carson was the class of.
I've
the
never
late
heard anybody go, Carson sucked.
No.
You know, nobody.
Yeah.
You know, like people don't like certain actors, even that we think they're the best or something, but never about Carson.
Well, for stand-up comedians, Johnny Carson, people would think he was a stand-up comedian. He wasn't. He was a game show host, and he was a talk show host. He did stand-up in Vegas, but he wasn't a true stand-up, and he really admired stand-up comedians.
But he turned into one, you know, on the show, unlike Conan, who mugs his way through stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
You know, Conan is a brilliant writer and a funny guy, but he's just like, he's like a kid that has this big toy, and they all laugh automatically. You press a button, applause sign, they're clapping, you know. Carson played it so smart. I mean, to get to the point where you could get a laugh on something funny or get a bigger laugh on something unfunny, you can't lose.
No, but remember one thing, too. The real difference of who is a true stand-up comedian. Conan doesn't take his act into the clubs or into Vegas. Jay does. Johnny Carson did.
Yeah.
David doesn't. David Letterman doesn't. That's who the true stand-up comedian is, the one who's willing to take it now, where the applause sign isn't there, where the cue cards aren't there.
Well, David seems so unhappy now.
Now.
Well, always? Was he always miserable?
Well, you know, you and I have had this discussion. 85% of all stand-up comedians, and this is my opinion, 85% of all stand-up comedians are insecure, neurotic, sometimes psychotic, loved, starved wrecks. And the other 15%.
I have to stop you. I don't agree. I'd say 83.5%. I think 85 is a little high. You're going crazy.
You're right. But the other 15% are gifted, competent people who say, I know how to write a joke and I know how to tell one. Now, that doesn't make them bad people that they're insecure, but that's what makes them funny. And some people that never enjoyed the journey. David is one of those comedians, why he's so good, one of those show business personalities, is because he never feels like he belongs. He always feels like he's fooling them and he's got to work harder and work harder. You know what I mean? That sort of, when I used to say to him, and he's my friend and I love him to death, but I said, sometime look in the mirror, David, and say, you know what? I'm here because I worked hard and I'm very good at what I do. He could never do that, you know. He just...
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he's really very loyal to you, your generation of guys, that group in the Comedy Store that he takes care of, because you keep working and you keep sharp. But a couple of guys, some of the only things they do, and God bless them for doing it, is that they do Letterman.
Yeah.
I don't want to name names, but you know.
No, I understand. David is loyal to and he lets his old buddies, he'll get him on the show.
Leno, you know who's Leno's loyal to? Lou Gatz. Lou Gatz. He's loyal to Lou Gatz. He don't give a shit. He's so desperate to hold on to that thing that it you know, it's kind of like somebody who loves his woman too much. It's unattractive.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. You know that I do David 3 times a year, and David let me host when he had the shingles.
Yeah,
and
I
stuff,
wish I'd have known that.
So I'm obviously loyal to you know, anybody let you host, and him letting me host the Letterman show, how that helped me was incredible, because I do a lot of corporate dates. Well, sometimes in order to justify your price, the corporate guy, they'd say, well, go to his website, and you'd see on the website me hosting Letterman. That gave me a lot more dollars in corporate America.
Well, because you're such credibility. You're hosting one of the major talk shows.
Well, and that's what helped. I mean, I'll always be grateful to David for doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was cool.
For letting me do that.
I did the show once, and it's pretty funny because all I wanted to talk about was sports. This is when we were off the air.
Yeah.
They said he doesn't come in and talk that much, but I guess he knew I knew sports.
Yeah.
and he wanted to talk about my Ed McMahon joke. I did a joke about Ed McMahon. He wanted to hear that.
Yeah.
So at least he seemed to have a little fun.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
David Letterman is to me like a lot like Johnny Carson, as much as David has had such tremendous respect for stand-up comedians. He always has. I mean, he's a while back, him and I after the show we went out and we snuck over to Caroline's and snuck in the back because Paul Mooney was on. And
Yeah.
Paul was one of the guys that started out with David and I. And
Guess you had some time on your hands.
yeah, we had some time on our hands, and we went in the back.
Paul Mooney did long at the Christmas. We give the Christmas dinner at the Laugh Factory. Jamie Masada does his Christmas dinner, and all the poor and the homeless and out-of-work actors are all invited here. And Paul Mooney's notorious for doing long sets. He even did long at the benefit. They had to keep flashing him.
It was the first time in the history.
Were you here?
Yeah, I was here. I was on before him.
Oh.
And it was the first time in the history of the Laugh Factory. 33 years we've been doing this, feeding the homeless. It was the first time he was on so long that the homeless gave the food back.
Thanks. We'll get our own food. I can't take it.
As long as we're talking about that, one of my favorite stories of the 33 years of feeding the homeless and then getting up and performing for them. And I think I told you the story, but Paul Mooney, Margaret Cho, and I were feeding.
You, Margaret Cho, and Paul Mooney. There's a threesome.
We were feeding, and Margaret Cho was on gravy, I was on mashed potatoes, and Paul was on turkey, right? And two raggedy old guys come by.
Man, the white meat. Why does the white meat always represent? He makes everything racial.
Oh yeah, of course. But these two old raggedy guys walked by and they had the plate and we're putting the food on their plate and they got to the end and one of them looked at the other one. He said, "They had bigger names here last year."
Bigger names dishing out
Bigger
food.
names dishing out food. So Mooney said, "Oh, brother, bigger names," and he took the drumstick off the guy. He said, "Go get some turkey from a bigger name," And we laughed. But I thought that was
I followed a guy that actually had an act that was from Skid Row. Did you see him?
I was here. He was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the people that are listening,
Not Skid Row, the rock group.
Yeah,
the real Skid Row.
Yeah, this guy is homeless on the streets, and he has been for 5 years. But he put together an act, and Jamie put him up, and the guy did 10 minutes, and he in front of his peers, and he was excellent. He was wonderful. So Jamie gave him a spot.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. So he's going to get a paying spot at the Laugh Factory, and
where do we send the check?
That's he'll have to come here and pick it up.
Come and pick it up.
Like
But he has
else.
no car. Isn't it sad? I mean, when you think about that, like our references are so limited when we're performing in front of these people. These
Yeah.
poor people.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have homes. They can't talk about travel. You can't. What are you going to talk about? Shopping carts?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them are. Some of them are just crazy, but a lot of them, it's sad. you know?
Yeah, some of them are off their meds, but see, I think that what's wonderful about that is just shows what a good stand-up comedian is all about. Look, we come here and feed you because, hey, except for the grace of God, we'd be out there, right? And the other part is that, and we're even willing to get up. A lot of the prima donnas would say, "No, it's not the right kind of room for me, and my stuff won't
Not
go
the right
here."
kind of room.
Yeah,
Oh, they're my people. That's
Yeah.
my crowd.
Exactly. So we get up and we try to give them a few laughs, but I always find them very grateful, and
Yeah.
and they laugh, and and it's another challenge. Why would you want to be a stand-up comedian and only work safe all the time? You gotta, if you don't take it to, you gotta keep taking it to another level to challenge yourself.
Well, I think some people work safe because they're, like we were talking about people who only do Jewish condominiums, only wear Jewish condoms. The one with the little yarmulke on the top. But, the guys who only work black clubs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's too safe.
Yeah. Well, again, funny is funny is funny. No one in the whole world is funny to everybody. There's only
No,
one.
I think you and I are.
Well,
Other
okay.
than the rest of them.
Other than the
Rest of the mooks.
There's only one rule in comedy: be funny. That's the only rule we have. Be funny. You're not going to be funny for everybody. You're going to do the best you can with every crowd. But
I like to think I hurt somebody too. With all the comedy, like just one person, I hope walks away emotionally scarred every time I do a show, just to balance off life a little.
I've been watching you work since you started. We go way back. I saw you way back, and you were brand new, and you were funny then. And then you and I even remember we did a baseball thing with Bob Euchre way out in East Ubip. You remember one time?
Yeah.
Some TV show.
Vaguely. Was that in Arizona?
Arizona, that's right, yeah. It was a
Wow.
cold night, too. We did it outdoors somewhere.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I must have just came out here because I came out here in '87 for good. I started in '85. I started stand up in '80
Did you really?
in New York at the Improv.
Yeah.
I passed at the Improv. I didn't pass at any of the small clubs.
No kidding.
Funny, yeah. I auditioned at the Rainy Night House. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
You were out here. When did you come out
Well,
here?
yeah, I came out here in 1970. I did my first Tonight Show in 75, 76.
75.
Yeah.
So you were way established before. That's cool. 75. That was like when stand-up comedy was just starting to rebuild again.
It was what we called, was to me, the 70s were, comedy was the rock and roll of the 70s. It was rock. I mean, that was the hottest Sunset Strip, you know, the Comedy Store. First of all, Johnny Carson had been in New York, and he moved out here to the West Coast. Consequently, every comedian in America migrated out here to the West Coast.
Oh, they migrated after Carson?
Yeah,
No
sure.
kidding.
Because that was the show. I don't know what it was about Johnny Carson, but that was the show that show could launch you. One appearance on the Tonight Show,
I know.
Freddie Prinze got a sitcom. One appearance on the
Yeah.
Tonight Show, I got a development deal from CBS. I was in an unemployment line one day. The next day, after my first Tonight Show aired, CBS was offering me a development deal contract.
Yeah, well, I came late for that. What helped me was the Rodney Dangerfield special.
Yeah, that's right.
By the time I got to do Carson, it wasn't as like it was when you did it.
Yeah.
It was good, but it wasn't going to guarantee. I mean, Roseanne and Drew Carey were the only ones that I could think about in my generation. My group started when we did that really hit from the Tonight Show.
From the Tonight Show, yeah. Well, you know, but after you got to remember, in the 70s, the Comedy Store was the only game in town. You know, the Improv wasn't out here yet.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Time. Yeah, the Improv
I thought they
wasn't-
came out at the same time.
No, the Improv came a couple years later, and when the Comedy
They
Store
started their love affair,
Oh,
Mitzi
yeah.
and Bud.
Yeah, that if you work one, you can't work at the other. But the Comedy Store, the excitement, the buzz on Sunset Strip, every single night in the Comedy Store, every night one of the comics would say, these were the shows that you could get on as a stand-up comedian. Johnny Carson, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Dinah Shore, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. Jim Neighbors had a show that stand-up comics. Canada, they had people come down from Canada.
Really?
There were shows up in Canada, the Alan Hamill show, the Alan Thicke show.
Oh, Alan Thicke was in Canada originally?
He had a talk show there. So you could, my
Did
point
you
of
ever
that
do
is-
Alan Thicke's show?
Sure I did, yeah.
I did it with Bon Jovi.
Oh, no, I didn't do the Alan
Oh,
Thicke
you
show.
didn't?
When he had the late night show, I
Yeah,
did
yeah.
it in Canada.
Oh, no, I did it here.
Oh.
I did it with Bon Jovi and Jim Brown, football player.
Wow.
We were crying, laughing, singing the theme to the Alan Thicke Thick of the Night song, like with all our hearts. Every
Yeah.
time I see John Bon Jovi anywhere, I go, it was the thick of the night that gave you your break, kid. Got to be thankful.
I worked with John Bon Jovi in Hawaii a while back. It was really great. It was
Sam
really
Bora's a good guy. You know, did you meet Richie?
the guy in
Guitar player?
The guitar player. Yeah, I had.
Great
in
guy.
fact, I took a picture with all the guys.
He
that
used
were-
to go out with Cher when I was on tour with Cher, so he started hanging with us on the road.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was a terrific guitar player.
Yeah. Well, that's a terrific group. That's an incredible group, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, going back to that, every single night, a comic would come off stage and say, "I just got the Merv Griffin show. I just got the Tonight Show. I just got the Dinah Shore." Every single night, I could name you the coordinators from all those shows because we were all trying to get to them, you know. And so it was the excitement, the buzz. I mean, I would work every night with all these unknown comedians when I first came out here in the early '70s. Robin Williams, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Michael Keaton, Gallagher.
How was Keaton?
Keaton was a pretty good stand-up, but more of an actor stand-up.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when he went to Vegas and tried it, he didn't like it as much. He tried it a couple times and didn't like it. But he a terrific guy.
Did you work with Jimmy Walker?
Yeah, Jimmy, worked with Jimmy. But Jimmy, don't forget, Jimmy came out here. He had worked the Improv in New York, and he came out here and already was doing, he got good times almost immediately, you know. In fact,
I
he
think
may
it's
have
so
gotten
funny
good
that he
times.
won't say dynamite. And I like Jimmy, but I mean, if I had something like dynamite to make millions of dollars off of, I'd be dynamiting my ass off.
Yeah.
Dynamite!
Well, first of all, in comedy, the one thing you hope you find is a hook. And, you know, if I say I get no respect, we know who we said.
Of course.
When
That's
you
the
say,
best hook
Can we
ever."
talk? You know, years ago, it was The Devil Made Me Do It. That's Flip Wilson.
Right,
I mean,
right.
you'd name that certain hook. And an old comedian who I loved dearly was Jack Benny. I met him when I was a brand new comedian.
Did you really? You met Benny?
Yeah, I was a huge fan, and I wanted to be like him. To me, him and Richard Pryor were two, strangely enough, both Illinois guys, and I'm from Illinois. But Pryor, because I was a street guy who grew up in a poor neighborhood, I had 8 kids. We had 8 kids. We lived in a shack. 5 of us slept in one bed. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood. So Richard spoke from my soul. That's where I grew up at. But the other, Benny, he made comedy look, I think you're an artist in any endeavor when you make your work look one word, effortless.
Yeah.
Jack Benny made comedy look easy. Frank Sinatra made singing look easy. You will be my music. You will be my song. You say, I can do that. No, you can't. He just made it look like you could.
Right,
And
right.
that's what Benny did with comedy. when a comedian gets up here and it's a conversation, not a presentation, and everybody in the audience says, well, I could do that. I could talk about my... You can't. The comedian just made it look like you
Well,
could.
yeah, and it's also esoteric comedy compared to, we're talking about broad comedy that other people, like anybody in our families can be as funny as anybody else because they can make references to Aunt Yola. Nobody knows Aunt Yola.
Yeah.
So we have to describe Aunt Yola. That's the trick. You know, it's
Absolutely,
like, yeah, it's funny. You know, I don't understand how I bombed on stage. I was so funny at the christening. That's a big difference. Everybody, you grew up with everybody at the christening.
Yeah.
You know.
It's a world of different. A lot of guys were funny at the bar. You know, whenever somebody says about funny, there were guys in my neighborhood that were funnier than I was. I mean, there's a lot of fun. I met a lot of people that were funny, but they could never get up here and do it.
Yeah, but all they did was like dick jokes.
Yeah, well, that's true too. That's true too.
Hey, what about? And of course, he's funny. You know, he's in jail now.
Yeah,
he's the funniest guy in his cell block.
In acting, I studied acting in Chicago and out here, of course, but in L.A. But in acting, they teach you about the fourth wall. You know, that on your left is an imaginary wall, on your right is an imaginary wall. You know, upstage is an imaginary wall, and then you put a wall down in front of the audience, and that's the fourth wall. And so that you and I can do a scene where I'm slobbering all over because you're dying, and no one's there but you and I. But stand-up comedy, you break down that fourth wall. That fourth wall's got to go. You got to get through to the people that you're communicating your comedy to.
I love it. I still love it. People always ask me, and I'm sure they ask you, why do you do it so much? What do you do? It's like, I want to improve.
Yeah.
I want to keep improving. You know, I mean, I'm not where I want to be. And you know, don't you think that if you don't do it, you just get worse?
Mine is out of pure love. I really love making people laugh. I wrote a poem years ago that became a country song, but it was called "The Sound of Laughter." I'm not going to do it for you, but the first line was, "As far back as I can remember, or shortly thereafter, I love to hear the sound of laughter." And I always did. When I was a little boy shining shoes, my biological father, who was, it's a long story, it was my mother's brother-in-law. My mother had an affair with her brother-in-law, and I'm the
We'll save it for another show.
Yeah, that's right. Frank Polizzi was his name. He owned a tavern. My mother was a bartender there, and I used to shine shoes in all the bars in my neighborhood. I shined shoes in his bar last. I'd go there last because my mother was there, but I'd also wait for the shifts to change in the factory. Then I'd go back around my shoe shine box. But he told jokes at the bar, and it fascinated me that with his vocabulary and an inflection on a certain word could cause this sound to come out of everybody's body and fill the air like electricity.
Yeah.
It was amazing to me that, and I just gravitated to the sound of laughter ever since I was a kid.
Well, it is amazing. It is amazing that people come out to evoke one emotion. You know, like I was kidding with somebody in the audience the other night, couple. How long you been together? 15 years. I said, you know why you came out tonight? Because you needed a laugh, right? They go, yeah. I said, but the thing is, the sad part is, you can't make each other laugh anymore. You need to come to professionals.
Yeah.
You're boring each other to tears at home. Look at you. I'm so sick of you. But there's some element of truth to that. You know, you need to get out and.
Yeah, but you made a point. You said about I want to grow. I want to grow.
Of course.
I was working at Harrah's years ago, and next door was George Burns at Caesars. He was 95 years old.
Yeah.
I went to see his show. He didn't run out to that microphone, but when he got out there, he did an hour and 10 minutes.
Wow.
When he got done, I went backstage to congratulate, say, good show. And he had a piece of paper with him. He said, Tommy, I tried out 2 new jokes. And he's showing me he's 95
cool?
years old,
Yeah.
and he was all excited about doing some new material. And I said to myself when I walked out, I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be 95 years old and still excited about doing new material.
But that's stand-up. In 10 years, you could have so much, you know, like if you work hard enough, you get so much more material. It could be completely different, a different hour, you know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's by the way, it's a brand new audience every night. And every 2 years, there's a whole new audience in there. And I'll give you a classic example. Jimmy Brogan, as you know, many years ago used to book The Tonight Show for Jay Leno.
The irony of him was he was the where you're from guy.
Yeah.
And he was the one that would decide about material.
Yeah.
But he had no material.
Yeah.
It's like, I said, Brogan, where do you get the balls to do this?
Yeah.
Well, you know, sir. He called me sir.
But Jimmy Brogan one night was in here, this years ago, and he was in the Laugh Factory, and he was looking for new comedians to be on The Tonight Show. And somehow the discussion came up about it's different today, Tommy, and they got to be topical. And I said, Jimmy, I could go up on stage tonight and do my first Tonight Show. And they would, no, I said, I don't think you could do that, Tommy. I said, I could do my first Tonight Show in this audience. No. I said, okay, the first 6 minutes I'm going to do tonight is my first Tonight Show. And he said, and I walked up and I did joke after joke of what I did on my first Tonight Show, and they never heard it before. They never
Yeah.
heard the material
Isn't
before.
that great that it's all new again?
Yeah, it's all new. So that's the other good thing about us, that we can,
Right.
that it keeps changing in comedy audiences. Every 2 years is a brand new audience out there.
I remember seeing you at the Improv one night, and I really got sucked in. I really thought you were serious about you met a man with no shoes.
Oh yeah.
There's that bit,
Yeah,
you know,
that
and
bit,
I saw a man with no feet, and I realized you must have shoes, something, whatever.
Well, I said my
know
mother
the
was
bit.
my mother had. All
But you
these
know, it was
sayings,
so
cliches.
sincere
Yeah.
that I really got sucked in. I go, oh, he got me.
Yeah.
What's the bit?
My mother was full of cliches. You know, I don't know if your parents were like this. I said, but my mother used to have all these cliches or to get you over the tough times. Her favorite saying was, never cry if you have no shoes, because one day you'll see a man who has no feet. And I always thought that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. But many years ago, I came out here to Hollywood. I was broke. I was down and out. I was walking up Hollywood Boulevard one day. I didn't have any shoes. I began to cry. And I saw a man with no feet. And I said, you probably got some shoes laying around you're not using. But the essence of a joke, you take them down the path of truth, and then you drop the bottom on them.
Right.
The comedy is two things when you're writing a joke. Number one, it's 9/10 surprise. The audience laughs because they didn't think you were going to say that or do that. So the setup line has to hide the punchline. And the other rule is there are no victimless jokes. Who's the victim in this joke? You know, when Rodney said, I get no respect, he was a victim.
Yeah.
You know, is it you? Is it...
Oh,
Years
yeah.
ago, I met Mort Saul. I was in the business 4 months. I snuck backstage at Mr. Kelly's in Chicago, and I knocked on the door. He could have thrown me out. He was so good to me. He opened the doors. Yeah, he was all by himself. I said, Mr. Saul, my name is Tom Dreesen. I'm a new comedian. Could I talk? Yeah, come on in. Come on in. You're a new comedian. How long you been doing? I said, 4 months. No kidding. And he sits me down and treated me. I walked out of that day, and I said, if ever I can ever help another comedian, and what he did to me made me put me on cloud 9. But he talked to me for an hour before his next show. But I never forget one of the things he said. Do you write your own material? I said, yeah. He said, remember, they're wrong. I said, who? He said, they. I said, they. He said, who are you writing about? They're wrong. Government, they're wrong. Airlines, they're wrong.
Right.
Somebody's got to be wrong in this joke.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
you're wrong. Your daughter's dating a guy, he's wrong, or you're right.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah,
That's interesting advice.
yeah, it is.
I think they're wrong.
Of course they're wrong.
I love the comedians who think that there's a conspiracy against them. They don't understand how hard it is. Some kid came up to me at the Improv one night and he goes, "How do I get on the Tonight Show?" I said, "Well, you know, you got to really write." I said, I said the hard thing about the Tonight Show is you get not just to get them to see you, but to write that kind of tight. That's why I can't believe how many you did. That's on a different level, different universe. But he said, and when he went like this, he goes, "You got to write." Like, I said, what'd you think? You just call up the president of show business because he's a friend of your uncle's? Get the kid on the show. He's a funny kid.
I love when the real hip comics used to say, "See, Tommy, I don't do jokes." You know what I mean? You do jokes. I don't do jokes. I said, "You do jokes." No, I don't do jokes. No, you do. If you're trying to get a laugh, that's a joke. I don't care what you want to camouflage it as.
No, I understand what they're saying in a sense, but you're right. I mean, I don't know how to write a joke. I literally don't know how to write. Like Rita Rudner is a mathematician, and she said that. Her and I had a discussion one time. She is scientifically a joke writer. I can write cadence and rhythm, and it comes out to be a joke, but it's not like, you know what I mean? But if they're all, yeah, I mean, what's your definition of joke? Mine is something that, you know, has a funny ending.
I was going to say a punchline.
Yeah.
You got to, because you and I, any comedian can sit in an audience and we'll watch another comedian work, and he starts going off or she starts going off on this story, and we're both interested. And there's a certain point that story's gone long enough that you'll look at me and I'll look, because we'll both get it at the same one. This better have a hell of an ending.
Right.
This better have a killer ending, because you've taken us on too long a journey now, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you see Chris D'Elia come up on stage. You know Chris.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, I mean, he's funny.
Yeah.
He's just hilariously funny, and he gets them right away. Now, the advantage he does have is that he's closer in age, which is out of the box, it's an advantage. Eventually, they're going to judge you by the material.
Yeah.
But Jimmy Brogan, we're upstairs when, and you know, Jimmy is very old school in some ways. He goes, "You know, Tom, I just don't get it." I go, "Jimmy, they get it. Somebody gets it."
Yeah.
I never thought Robin Williams. Robin never made me laugh, but I respect him.
Yeah.
I respect the fact that, you know, like you see, you know, everybody's not your cup of tea. Everybody's not your flavor of the day, but he's definitely effective.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, well, you know, again, comedy isn't what I am. It's what you are. You know, if somebody says to me, "Are you funny?" I'll say, "Is the lady in in the second row with the red dress laughing. They look out and they say, no. I said, then I'm not funny. But the guy next to her with the brown suit, he's laughing. I said, oh, then I'm funny. Yeah, but the guy next to him is not. I said, then I'm not funny. But the woman next to him, I said, well, then I am funny.
Right.
It's so subjective.
Well, I mean, I go to Ireland every year, and I got a real attachment with Ireland. And the press would always ask me anytime there was an interview, they go, you really go to Ireland? Like, I'm going to lie about Ireland. And they go, yeah. They go, do they get, like, who's going to bullshit? They go, do they get you in Ireland? I go, no, they don't get me. That's why I go back every year. Because it's so nice to hear my act in peace and quiet with all that interruptive laughter and applause. Do they get you? Of course they get you. Who gets asked to go back 16 times in a row, 16 years? I see kids grow up there,
You know, the opposite of it is when the comic says to you, say, where'd you appear? Man, I was just in Akron, Ohio at this club called Sutton Miller's or something like that. And I mean, it was the worst crowd. I mean, they'd love your stuff over there.
Oh, yeah,
You'd
yeah.
kill 'em.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about Jimmy. He said that once. Me and Harry Basil. Now, Harry Basil is this terrific prop act. A completely different style, but very funny, very, one of the biggest laughs I've ever seen he gets when he throws up the egg. Remember that?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
He does this Rocky bit, and he puts like 3 raw eggs in a glass, and he drinks them down. Everybody's going, oh, and then he throws it up, and that's a bigger laugh than any punchline we could ever write. But Jimmy said that the same thing. I loved it because, I mean, I like I bust on him, but I like him, and I go, he goes, the crowd's terrible. They're really stupid. He said, they'll love you and Harry. In other words, you two idiots, they'll love.
Yeah.
An intellectual like me, they don't get. I'm way over the head.
That was always there's always a comedian that doesn't get there because he's too hip, because his type of material is only for a special audience.
Yeah.
And then you're not as I remember years ago
I know what you mean. That
they used to give. He's a Vegas comic.
I'm an alternative comedian. I don't do. What's the alternative?
Yeah, exactly.
Not being funny? Is that the alternative?
Yeah, I don't get laughs. I'm the alternative.
Yeah.
They used to say that years ago. It was like a negative connotation. He's a Vegas comic. You know how hard it is to work in Vegas? Because in that audience, if you're working Toledo and they're all from Toledo, I can start out with a whole lot of Toledo jokes and things they'll identify with, or Chicago, or wherever we're from. But when you go to Vegas, there's 2 people here from Brooklyn, there's 2 people here from Rio de Janeiro, then there's 2 people there from Japan, there's 2 people there from Kansas City. So you better be funny. You better have some.
What's the most exciting Vegas gig you ever did?
There's 2 different purposes. My very first time in Las Vegas was at Caesar's Palace with Sammy Davis Jr., and that's hard to describe what that's like, driving down that strip and seeing your name on the marquee of Caesar's Palace.
I couldn't believe it when I did the Comedy Store, let alone that. But just the comedy. I'm in Vegas. I never expect to be in Vegas.
Oh, I know. It is in those days they didn't have any comedy clubs in Las Vegas. They were all, you either worked the main room or a lounge. And I started out in the main room with Sammy Davis. So it was an incredibly exciting thing to do, Caesar's. Because whenever you heard of Las Vegas, even before you were ever in show business, you heard Caesar's Palace, But it's hard to describe what it's like appearing in Las Vegas with Frank Sinatra.
That's golden.
He was. I always said it was like being an altar boy and serving mass with the Pope or something, being with Frank every night, the audiences, you could feel the electricity in the room.
Yeah, plus the cool thing about him was you could actually open for him, like, because the audience he had, whatever, like, I could see opening for Frank, I could see even opening for Elvis, but I can't see anybody from the Beatles because they created such a craziness. Yeah. I mean, they were all great in their own ways, but
sure.
He had a mellowness to his audience, whatever, like a cool, sophisticated, hey, kid, here's $100 put me up front, But that must have been exciting. I got to work with them. I didn't work on stage with them, but when they opened Bally's, and Sinatra, and I know your history with Sinatra, I want to get into that a little, but it was Sinatra, Dean Martin was sick, so Jerry Lewis took his place, and Sammy Davis Jr., and the guy, Frankie Randall, do you remember him?
Oh, sure, wonderful guy.
Frankie Randall says to me, he says, you want to meet Sinatra? I says, no, I don't want to meet him. I said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to just see rehearsal. Can I see that? He goes, yeah, no problem. That's what I wanted to see.
Yeah.
Just the process of the rehearsal. How cool was that?
Yeah.
I don't want to bother him. What am I going to say? Man, I really like your work.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Good stuff. Keep up the good work. I said that to Neil Simon once. Well, we'll get into that later. But Neil Simon goes, I like your work. I go, what do I say to you? The most prolific playwright of the 20th century. right back at you. He
Yeah.
goes, I say, keep up the good work. He goes, it's exactly what you say. What do you think? You know?
Yeah, yeah,
But I met Sammy Davis. He was just like you'd hope he would be.
yeah.
Just that warmth and hey
Yeah,
man,
yeah,
you know, cool.
yeah.
Like, but you must have been through some adventures with
Another
Frank.
guy who loved stand-up comics, Sammy Davis. Sammy Davis had the highest respect for stand-up comedians.
Did you know Dean Martin?
No, sure. I did shows with Dean. I did shows with Dean.
He was funny, right?
No, he was funny. Dean Martin was the kind of guy that didn't say anything all day long, but then he'd say one line and you'd fall on the floor.
Yeah.
Fall on the floor. You'd be, you know, I'll tell you a story. You can say the F word.
Yeah.
Frank and I we were on the road and we were working in Detroit, and we had a matinee that afternoon at the Fox Theater, and then we had an evening show in the afternoon. Frank and I were watching Sunday afternoon football, and waiting for the next show. And he had been after Dean to put the teleprompters in. You know, Frank used teleprompters till the end of his life because
Yeah, I remember.
they start forgetting lyrics, and Frank did the same 17 songs. So
Well,
he
Cher
was saying-
used them in her 40s.
Oh, a lot of
Yeah.
the rock stars have the plug in their ear and they
Yeah.
have the lyrics. So the teleprompters were fine. So Dean wouldn't do that, and he was forgetting lyrics to songs, and Frank kept after him. We used the teleprompters, and because once Frank started using them, he brought him songs he hadn't sung in years, Moonlight in Vermont and everything. He loved them. So Dean wouldn't do it. And then while we're watching this football game, the phone rings, and it's Mort Viner was Dean Martin's manager, and in the room, Frank's guy Elliot Weissman was his manager at the time. He comes off the phone. He says to Frank, he said, "It's Mort Viner." He said, "Dean used the teleprompters last night in Vegas, and he loved them." He said, he walked off stage and said, "Book me on a world tour. These things are great." Frank said, "Damn it, I've been telling him for years. Get him on the phone. Let me talk." And he gets Dean on the phone. And he said, and he called him Deg. He said, "Hey, Deg, how many times have I told you? You know, we're not kids anymore. For God's sake." He said, "These young kids, these rock stars, they got them plugs in their ear, you know, and they do. And I've been after you for years using them teleprompters." And Dean didn't want to hear that. You know, Dean said, yeah. He said, "Where you guys at?" Frank said, "Hold on one second." He said, "Tommy, where we at?" I said, "We're in Detroit." And he said, "We're in Detroit." Dean said, "Did you have to look in the fucking teleprompter to find out where you're at?"
You need a teleprompter to have your meal?
Frank dropped the phone on the floor, and he said, he did it to me again, because he made Frank laugh all the time.
Yeah, I heard that.
But he would all day long, he wouldn't say anything, but he'd do one line, and it would be the line you'd quote the next day, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, they have a picture of Ciro's at the Comedy Store with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis headlining.
Yeah.
The original, the main room at the Comedy Store used to be a nightclub called Ciro's, and it was supposed to be like a real mob place. And you never were out here when that was.
No.
That was early, yeah.
But you know one of the great stories there? At the Academy Awards one night, after the Academy Awards, everybody went to Ciro's. Patty Page was headlining. Opening for her was a brand new group called the Will Maston Trio with Sammy Davis Jr. Now, Sammy Davis Jr. and Will Maston Trio had been around for years, and they would knock audiences dead, but they'd never made the big time. They always worked like mostly black clubs and everything. And they opened for Patty Page that night and brought the house down. Brought standing ovation after standing ovation that Patty Page couldn't follow them, saying that Patty Page died today. I mean, it's in the paper.
Today?
She died. It was in the paper today. Patty Page died. Ironic, I'm telling a story, but they got such standing ovation. Sammy did impressions of James Cagney. You know, in those days, Will Maston used to say, "Don't be doing impressions of white folks. You're going to get us in trouble." And Sammy did Cagney, he did Jimmy Stewart, he did Jerry Lewis. So bad, they killed the audience so much that the next night Patty Page said, "I'll open for you guys. I can't follow you." She couldn't follow him, and that's when they got discovered, and they went on. You know.
Isn't it interesting when you brought up that thing about Sammy Davis? I mean, I know there's a lot of topics to cover in one hour, but the idea of like how much they helped racial harmony by having Sammy Davis in that group. You know, I mean, think about it. At those days, but you know, before civil rights, before any of that, that they hung with a black guy, it was really cool, and you know, as far as from you know the society seeing that, oh, well, maybe it is okay.
Well, you know, more than you'll ever know, Sammy Davis Jr. to me was the Jackie Robinson of show business.
Yeah.
And what breaks my heart.
And he became Jewish.
Yeah.
Just to throw something else in the mix.
What breaks my heart is how young black comics ape him and mimic him like he was a shuffling Uncle Tom or something like that, which he was not.
Yeah.
He took more torture and more pain, and he broke the barriers down for a lot of black artists.
Yeah.
And that they would do that to him. To me, there'll never be anybody like. I saw him do something that no other entertainer could ever do. None. We worked the Black Expo was Tim Reed and I in Chicago. I was with a comedy team my first 6 years. Tim Reed and I were America's first black and white comedy team, and history shows we were the last. We wrote a book a couple of years ago.
Which were you?
I played the white guy.
Oh, okay. Just check.
And the book we wrote is now becoming a movie. We've got the final draft in,
Cool.
and they're going to be in, there'll be castings. Anyhow, we hopefully the movie will be in production this year. From 1969 to 1975, what it was like touring the nation as America's first black and white comedy team, and there were no comedy clubs in those days. So we worked all black clubs in the North and the South. They called the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. And we worked all white clubs too, but we worked the Playboy Circuit and everything. But anyhow, in Chicago, the one year they had the Black Expo. They've been having every year. It's all the African Americans in America, businessmen and everything, would come for 1 week of networking, And at the end, they culminated it with a show. And that show was an all-day show in front of 20,000 people. The audience just kept coming in and changing audience, but packed. And it was Bill Cosby and the OJs and the Temptations and Gladys Knight and the Pips and Smokey Robinson. It was every black act you'd ever seen, Marvin Gaye. And so we comics in Chicago, and I was the only white guy there because I was with Tim, we stayed in the wings, and every time they needed to strike the stage, they'd say, get up and do 5 minutes, get up and do 5 minutes. I sat there for 6 hours before we performed, but I didn't mind. I was watching all these great acts. In comes Sammy Davis Jr. He'd flown 3,800 miles.
Had you met him yet?
I never met him. He had flown 3,800 miles to come and be at the Black Expo. And there was a lot of buzz there because 4 months prior to that, he had gotten an award at the White House, and he hugged President Nixon. And that picture where he hugged Nixon went on the cover of Jet and the cover of Ebony, and he was persona non grata in the black community.
Really?
Because they hated Nixon.
Wow.
So now, at that point, Sammy, if you knew Sammy, he hugged stop signs. He hugged everybody. If he met you once, he hugged you, But so this is the first time he's appearing in front of an all-black audience since that picture was on the cover of Jet and Ebony. The MC goes out on the stage, and we all backstage. Oh, it's Sammy Davis. All the entertainers. Sammy Davis, a lot of you could feel the electricity. The MC goes out and said, ladies and gentlemen, blah, 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 Sammy Davis Jr. And 20,000 black people began to boo and scream. Boo, get off the stage, you Uncle Tom, MF, white man's uncle, you white man's N-word, and get off the stage.
You can't win.
They were booing so loud that Sammy couldn't get George Rhodes, his conductor, into the countdown so that the music would drown out the boos.
Right.
Sammy just stood there, and finally George couldn't hear me. He had the headphones on. He stood there, and they booed, and George, get off the stage, standing and screaming. All of us got knots in our stomach. This is the great Sammy Davis Jr., but he wouldn't leave the stage. He stood there. The MC came back out, calmed everybody down, said, folks, the man came 3,800 miles to sing for you. Isn't what we're fighting for is the right to be a Democrat or a Republican or a Protestant, a Catholic or a Jew? He said, the man came 3,800 miles. Shouldn't he be allowed to sing? Shouldn't he at least be heard? And mumble grumble, they sat down. Sammy went over and changed his sheet music, and he sang one song. He sang I Gotta Be Me. And he sang the shit out of that song. He walked that stage. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong, I gotta be me. I'll go it alone if that's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. Now, at the end of that, halfway through the song, we said, oh my God, you see what he's doing? You see what he's doing? He's getting that crowd back. At the end of that song, in respect to the black community, he got a standing ovation. It's like, we still don't believe your politics, but that was a bitch what you just did.
Yeah.
No other, to this day, 45 years in show business, that's the single greatest performance I've ever seen in my life. I've seen people take a tough crowd and after an hour get them back. I've never seen anybody take a hostile audience and in one song get a standing ovation.
Isn't that interesting that you can't win when you're in that situation? You literally can't win. I mean, here he is breaking a barrier, and then they're mad at him for that. And then if he didn't hug Nixon, people would go, "What? He's too big to touch the president."
Yeah.
Nixon opened his arms. The guy doesn't walk into them,
Yeah, it's one of those. No one said, but Sammy Davis Jr. taught me something. He's a street guy. Frank's a street guy, but Frank would have said, "I'm out of here." Dean would have said, "Bafangu." I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
But Sammy is a street guy. He said, "Okay, you got in my face and showed me what you got. Now let me show you what I got."
What would you have done?
I don't know. I would like to think that I was. But see, the comedian at boos and jeers and screams, we can't. I would like to think.
We can't play over that.
I would like to think that I would try to stay and tough it out. I've had, and as you had. Earlier in my career, I played all black clubs in the North South, all redneck clubs. I've had a lot of things come at me in my day, and I've tried to tough it out, But what I saw Sammy do there showed me, to me, it was the greatest single performance I've ever seen in show business.
To me, that's you're a better man than I am, Gunga Din.
Yeah.
I would have been out of there. I know I would have been out of there.
Yeah.
Hey, Bafangu.
Yeah. But see, Sammy was been in show business since he's 2.5 years old.
I
He
know.
wandered out on stage. You know, Frank Sinatra said to me, I never heard Sammy hit a clinker. Never. Frank would hit a clinker once in a while, and he said Sammy never hit a clinker. Sammy could sing as good as anybody out there. He could dance better than anybody out there. He could tell jokes as good as any comedian. He could do impressions better than anybody. He could play drums. He could play the
Yeah,
trumpet.
he could do everything. I know.
He was just the most amazing performer. And today he's a lot of times mimicked and ridiculed, and it makes me angry when I see that. You know.
Yeah, I always thought he was great. What do you think separated Sinatra from all the other artists?
First of all, most people forget of what a great actor he was. You know, Frank Sinatra won the Academy
From
Award.
Here to Eternity.
And I once said to him, in front of all these great actors, Kirk Douglas, Gregory Peck, Clint Eastwood, all at his house, we're sitting up 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, I was just curious. I said, Frank, did you ever study acting? And Gregory Peck grabbed my arm and said, acting lessons would have ruined him. He was a diamond in the rough you didn't fool with.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it made him different than any other artist. When you gave him a song, to him it was a script. What did the writer feel the night the writer took pen in hand? Frank would immerse himself into the lyric and become that lonely guy in the bar whose woman left him. And he's never going to find love again.
Imagine being such a great talent that people got laid by you putting on your music, by them putting your music on. That was their background. It was the romance. You know what I mean? That's pretty cool.
You want to hear a nice story about that? We were working in Worcester, Massachusetts at the Centrum. After the show, I went out hanging out with the band. There were 2 young girls sitting over in the guitar player, Ron Anthony. He said, see those 2 young girls? He said they laid flowers at Frank's feet, Mr. S's feet, during the show. He said, and they wept during the whole show. I said, oh, no kidding. Now, I'm going to check out, get my coat, and I'm leaving, and the 2 young girls up there, and they came up and they said, nice show, you made us laugh. And I said, can I ask you a question? How old are you? And the girl said, I'm 20. I said, how old's your girlfriend? She said, that's my sister. She's 18. I said, oh, the reason I asked that is because you seem awful young to be Sinatra fans. And Ron here said, you laid flowers at Mr. S's feet, and you wept during his performance. She said, my mom and dad loved Frank Sinatra. We had a big picture over the mantle of Frank Sinatra from one of his albums. We grew up hearing his music. My mom and dad died last year, 4 months apart. My dad died first. My mother died second. He said, my mother sat, my sister and I one night before she passed away, was just talking, and she said that her and dad used to make love to Frank Sinatra's music. So we realized that we were conceived to his music. So tonight while he was singing, we felt our parents' presence there.
We pictured our parents making love.
But you're right. How many
Yeah.
babies were born? Listen, John
pretty
Wayne
cool.
once said to Frank Sinatra at 3 o'clock in the morning in a bar, when one of Frank's songs came on, and all the guys in the bar started looking down at their drink. John Wayne looked down at the guys at the bar and he said to Frank, who do you listen to when you feel like these guys? Frank was the only one you listened to when you feel
Well, it
like
was such a cool gig that nobody thought of you as an opening act. They thought you were working with Sinatra. You know what I mean? Big difference.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I always wondered about him and those guys because I knew about Elvis. Like when that happened, when the British invasion happened. I mean, he was so solid with millions and millions of fans. I don't think, it affected him. It affected the Motown scene.
Mm-hmm.
But how did he feel about like the Beatles and all?
Well, first of all, he recorded Something in the Way She Moves Me yesterday.
Oh, he recorded Yesterday?
He recorded, and he thought they were real good songwriters.
Yeah.
But the music, he used to say, my kids love him. Any artist that could draw a crowd, and Frank had such respect for them.
Well, because Elvis tried to get them thrown out of the country. Did you ever know that story?
No, that I didn't know.
Yeah, well, if it's true. Ringo said it on one of those anthologies.
Wow.
That Elvis was really nice to them. They went to his house and all, but he was friends with the FBI. I'm sure he was very connected, Elvis, with the good old boys and all. And then he tried to get him deported.
I'm not surprised. Elvis was doing a lot of drugs in those days, and one of the there's a great story. I don't want to go into the show, but Elvis got a badge from Richard Nixon. Nixon gave him a federal FBI badge.
Really?
Elvis collected police badges.
He could park anywhere.
Elvis might have had 4,000 police badges from around the country. And one time, a guy in his crew, it's in Red West's book, Red and Sonny West, they were bodyguards for Elvis. They were his childhood buddies. And it's in his book. But Elvis was sleeping in one day, and one of their crew, a guy in their crew had stole the watch from Elvis, and they caught the guy, and they gave him plane fare and sent him home. And when Elvis woke up and they told him what happened, they jumped in the limo and he wanted to see the guy, and they drove out onto the airstrip and stopped the plane. And Elvis went running aboard, flashed the FBI badge, and the pilot said, "It's Elvis Presley." They went on the plane, they took the guy off the plane.
Wow.
And I mean, all that had to be reported in those days. It happened in Las Vegas. And so anyhow, they took the guy out in the desert, and the guy thought he was going to die. And the guy started crying, and Elvis felt sorry for him and gave him some money and took him back. but he flashed an FBI badge to the pilot and said, FBI business.
As if Elvis does not recognize?
Yeah, it's in the book about Elvis Presley.
Did you ever hear of a symphony that Sinatra wrote called Colors?
No, he wrote a symphony.
He wrote it. Yeah, he wrote a. It's all it's all classical music, and I remember when I was in college, and I never saw it again. It was called Colors, and every song was just a different color. But anyway,
no, I know he conducted once, and I've got the album somewhere. He conducted a trumpet player that he wanted to do a whole concert. And he conducted that. He had an ear. He was born to be a singer. One time at rehearsal at Caesars, he was doing a lot of Nelson Riddle arrangements, so those were a lot of strings, like 17 strings. And during rehearsal, in the middle of a song, he turned around and he said to the third violinist, who played in the L.A. Philharmonic, L.A. Symphony, he turned around and said to the third violinist, "You're out of tune." And the violinist said, "No, I'm not." And the other guys around said, "You are, Harry." And they start doing ding, ding, ding. And sure enough, Frank's ear picked that up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
He had to be very gifted. What was your favorite gig with him?
Well, there are so many. I mean, so many. I remember working. Obviously, going back to my hometown, Chicago, working the Chicago Theater, where as a little boy, shining shoes and selling newspapers. Once in a while, once a year, my brother, with the money we brought home to feed my brothers and sisters, once in a while, my older brother and my mom would let us go down to Chicago Theater and see a film down there, and they used to have live acts. And here I was appearing at Chicago Theater with Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was to walk out on that stage and be with Frank Sinatra in your hometown. It's just hard to describe how heartwarming that was. But of course, working Las Vegas with Frank Sinatra. But the other thing was going back to Garden State Arts Center, New Jersey, or Atlantic City, where Frank Sinatra was from.
Right.
And watch the way those people reacted to him walking out. That was their boy. That was their hometown boy.
Sure, that's what Springsteen. That's his turf too.
And he never. And they knew that he was Hoboken, for God's sake, and he didn't forget where he came from.
I did a play once, Lamppost Reunion.
Yeah, it was written by a guy named Frank.
Remember that?
Yeah, I remember the play real well.
Yeah, it was about Sinatra coming back to the bar.
Yeah.
And I don't know how LaRusso, the guy's name was.
Lou LaRusso.
Lou LaRusso, yeah.
It was called Lamppost Reunion.
Yeah.
And Frank hated that play.
Did he really?
Well, because...
Well, but they fictionalized him,
Well,
right?
yeah, they fictionalized. And everybody's name, though, the singer's name was Fred Santora. His best buddy was Jabby Rocky, which is Julie Rizzo, or Frank Sinatra. And he went back to the bar, and the guy had been in a group, like the Hoboken Four, that Frank was in.
Jilly was the only one that I really knew of that group, because when we opened Bally's in Atlantic City, I was in the lounge, and of course they were in the main room or on the stage outside, and Jilly would come up and see me every night.
Yeah.
You crack me up, kid.
I can imagine Jilly would love your stuff. Julie Rizzo had a glass eye that he lost in a fight, and of course Sammy Davis Jr. had a glass eye, so every Christmas Frank Sinatra would buy a set of binoculars, saw him in half, and send one to Julie and one to Sammy.
It's funny. You know the Brad Garrett story about him, right?
Brad subbed for me one night.
Is that what happened?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what happened, but I mean, Brad tells this story, but you tell the story.
No, tell me your version of it.
Well, no, you're right, what he said at the end of the night. Let me tell you what happened. Everybody will ask me, in all the years you toured with Frank Sinatra, did he ever get mad at you? And I said, only once. And it wasn't my fault. In all the years, Frank and I were, he was a pal. I was a pallbearer at his funeral. I spoke at his funeral, I loved him to death. I loved him like a father. But that one night, they asked me, the Sinatra office called me in June and gave me all these dates. One of them was December 26th, the day after Christmas. We'll go to Bali, and we close on January 1st, New Year's Day night. I said, gee, I can do every gig, but I've got a New Year's Eve gig that I've been contracted to do for like 2 years in Tahoe. They said, okay, we'll give you New Year's Eve off. we'll get a sub for that night, and they got Brad Garrett.
Oh, that's funny.
Now, Frank didn't know that. They didn't tell Frank. I thought Frank knew. So I take off to Tahoe. Next day I come back, and Hank Catano, Frank's road manager, said, "Oh, man, the old man's pissed at you." I said, he said, "He's pissed." What happened was he was walking backstage, as he always does, paced before the show, and he hears another voice out there. And he goes, "Who's that?" They said, "That's Brad Garrett." He said, "Where's Tommy?" He thought I got sick.
Right.
They said, they didn't want to tell him. They said, "Tommy had a gig." Frank said, "This ain't a fucking gig."
Take it easy, Frank.
Yeah, he got, no, but anyhow, long story short, the next day I came back. I said, to him, I said, "Frank, I thought, he said, Tommy, don't worry about it." But he was mad that night that I take off, this is a gig, But you tell the Brad Garrett what Brad said.
The way Brad told me, and nobody could do it like him, but he said, "Hey, thanks a lot, folks. Stick around for Frank."
Oh, yeah.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, they're also there to see him. He's being a wise guy. He's being funny.
Yeah.
And then apparently Jilly, who's like, 5'6", and Brad's like 6'8", 6'9".
Yeah.
And he goes, "What's with the stick around for Frank?" And Brad goes, "Oh, he goes, no more stick around for Frank."
Yeah.
That's all the gist of it was that.
Yeah. But it's funny that Jilly would do it, because when Pat Henry opened for Frank, he used to walk out and say, "Wow, look at the crowd. Wait till Frank's people get here," and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know Pat Cooper?
Sure. I still know him. He's still alive.
Yeah. I didn't know if you ever worked with him. The angry man.
Oh, he makes me laugh.
Yeah.
Dom, I would rather go have lunch with him than anybody in dinner. He cracks.
Well,
me
it's
up.
funny. He's like, he has so much warmth to all through that anger. But one time we were working doing some show for Comedy Central at Canners, and he kept bitching about everybody and then complimenting me as if I was so stupid I didn't get the fact that he was just complimenting me to keep me going. And this fucking kid, he does 5 minutes on it. He's got a series. 40 years I've been in this, but I like you, kid. And you know what I mean? It's like, anyways, because I worked with him a few times over the years, on some Goomba shit.
Yeah.
He always does well. I was there for his 80th birthday party, but I didn't know if you ever ran into him.
Oh, I ran a lot in New York. We had the same agent for a while, and I see him. I love Pat. I knew him back in Vegas days.
Pasquale, what was his name?
Pasquale Caputo. Pasquale Caputo. Yeah, he's a great old guy. The difference, and I think, Dom, you're the same way. When I first became a comedian, I knew every comedian that ever preceded me, and I had such respect for them. When I'd see them, I'd always because I just respected. I loved stand-up comedians before I ever was one. I never thought I'd be a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
But I do find a lot of the new young comedians have so little respect for those that preceded them, so much so that they think that if they've been doing it 10 years, that they created stand-up comedy and it all began with them.
Right. Well. It's just like any other thing. I mean, I always respected the fact that Mike Tyson knew the history of boxing and appreciated it.
That's right, yeah.
And there are guys that, believe me, there's guys out there that really know. Lenny Bruce, is a good example for me. I never really laughed at Lenny Bruce, but you have to put it in time.
Yes.
In his time, he was something that was needed to break through the barriers.
Yeah.
But I respect that, and I think there are guys, believe me, the Louis C.K.'s and the Daniel Tosches, they respect good comedy.
Well, I don't know. You see, because again, I would never ever say this guy's funny and that guy's, because I know comedy is subjective.
Yeah.
I know. But anybody who has the courage to get up on this stage and try to make people laugh already owns my heart. If it's a Monday nighter, I'll go see. Sometimes they'll say, "Tommy, will you go see this kid? He's doing an open mic night." I'll go, and they'll bomb, and they'll say, "What'd you think?" I said, "I'll come back tomorrow." And if I come back and that kid's back up there, I say, "He'll be all right. She'll be all right." Because we all been there. You know what I mean? You got enough balls to get up on a stage and try to make a group of strangers laugh. You already have my heart.
The stage is no problem for me, Tom. It's the rest of my life.
Yeah.
That's the tough part. All right, now I want to ask you something really important.
Okay.
Golf.
Yeah.
Did you ever play with those guys, and were you better? Was Sinatra any good? Did they get to play with you?
Frank wasn't a good golfer at all. Sammy loved golf, and Sammy was like a 16, 17 handicap.
How good are you in golf?
Well, I'm a single-digit handicap. I'm a 5 handicap. I fluctuate, 5, 6 handicap. But I caddied as a boy, don't forget. So I grew up poor, and I was carrying bags every. So I grew up in the summertime. I was around a golf environment. In 2006, Golf Digest ranked me as the 3rd best celebrity golfer.
Really?
In 2006, but
yeah, but that's still.
Yeah, it was good. But there there was another magazine, and I'll think of the name of it, ranked me the 9th best celebrity golfer of all time. Of all time. The best would be Jack Wagner, Bing Crosby. They were good golfers. But I played competitive golf on the Celebrity Players Tour. I'm one of the founders, you know. And so...
That's such a cool part of your life, isn't it?
Yeah. And as a comedian, first of all, you know, you carry 2 bags a day as a kid. I shined shoes. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied. And now, when I came out of the service, I would look at on TV in the local bar, and it'd be the Bob Hope Classic or the AT&T Pebble Beach, the clam bake. And I'd tell my buddies in the neighborhood, why don't we go there and caddy for those guys? I don't mean the pros, I mean the amateurs. Just to be in that environment. Today, I play in that. Today, they announced me on the tee. Last year, I was in this final group at Pebble. Nobody from my neighborhood was ever in the gallery.
Yeah.
So it's meaningful to me because to have been a caddy, to have been a poor kid with holes in your shoes. But now, let me tell you, as a comedian, how lucrative it is. Every time I ever do one of those golf shows, I'm the master of ceremonies for the Bob Hope Classic. Or was for 18 years. I'm the master of ceremonies for the AT&T Pebble Beach for Clint Eastwood. Master of ceremonies for the Frank Sinatra tournament, 25 years. Tiger Woods uses me for the Tiger Woods Foundation. Arnold Palmer uses me down in Bay Hill. When I get up in front of those audiences and do a show, in those audiences are Fortune 500 companies. Mm-hmm. Somebody will come up with a card. I'm with Allstate. I can't tell you how many gigs I got throughout my career.
Isn't that great? You can have a career just on your relationship to golf.
You can. I mean,
but you can because you're good.
Yeah, well, just today, yesterday, I got a call from a guy who wanted to book me at the Masters at Augusta. He's already pitching me to this, you know, blah blah blah. But those are the people that we want to work for. Those corporate gigs, you know, that's like stealing.
Now, let me ask you the gig that you and I are going to do. Are you gonna be dirty?
You're gonna work with me at Lakeside at my country club. Yeah. It's stag night, all guys.
So you'll be dirty?
Are you kidding me? I can do a stag.
I want to see Tom Dreesen dirty because I've never seen you dirty. You're clean even off the court.
I know, but you know, it's just Frank Sinatra. When I worked with Frank, one night in the heat of a guy was talking to me in the audience, and the guy was drunk. And he wasn't a bad guy. He was one of those kind of that you can have fun with, you know. And I'm going back and forth with this guy, and I never swear in my act, but he said something, and I paused and I went, "No shit," and it got the biggest laugh,
right?
In relative to what he was saying. I said, "No shit." Afterward, Frank, when he was grinning, Frank said, "Tommy, you don't need to swear to be funny. You're funny without swearing." Now, and I said, "No shit. Today that's so mild, you know." But there was when I worked with those guys, when you opened for Sammy Davis or Frank Sinatra, in that audience were Grandma and Grandpa, Mom and Dad, and the kids. And so there was a certain, you know, the Jack Benny's and the Bob Hopes and the George Burns. I sort of wanted to be like that. Now, can I work blue? Bob Hope could work blue, but you'd never.
I can't imagine it. But yeah, I mean, I used to open for Cher a lot, and you certainly didn't have to worry too much about language, considering her ass was out. You know what I mean? But I mean, if I saw kids or something, I'd keep. I mean, I didn't.
It's intimidating, isn't it, when you walk out and you see children in the audience?
Oh, I was opening for Copperfield, and he wanted me to do this thing. I don't know if you ever saw it, but I used to do like this alliteration thing. To pinche loaf, to cape squat, to roll some logs, to hiba Havana. It was a character, and all these dirty phrases were put together. To pork my wife, to booger my this kind of thing, right? Just this whole run. And I'd never met Copperfield. He calls me up right before I go on. He goes, "You going to do that poop pee thing?" I go, "Well, no, there's kids with balloons out front. I can't do that." He goes, "Oh, please, man." I go, "All right, but let it be in your head." He goes, "Come on." He says, "I booked you. You can't get fired." You know, so it was just, the kids are looking, "Mommy, Daddy, what's this man doing?"
I know. Well, there was a style about Sinatra. There was, a lot of people didn't realize that what a gentleman he was, his manners. I say that about working clean, but if you sat with Frank, and there was about 8 people at a table, and there were a couple women there, and Frank was in the middle of a conversation, and one of the ladies got up to go to the restroom, he would stand up. Yeah. Even if she wasn't across from him, he would say, and then he'd keep talking, and when she'd come back, and he'd rise again until she sat down. He had this old school.
Right, yeah.
And I suppose, I get that nickname all the time, he's old school, You know the line I do about that. I say, 2 young comedians at the Laugh Factory were talking about me. They didn't know I was there. They were around the corner. One of them said, Dreesen's old school. And the other comedian said, "What do you mean old school?" He said, "Well, he doesn't use the F word." And the other comedian said, "He doesn't use the F word. What does he use for adjectives?" And I turned around the corner and I said, "Adjectives."
Well, right. I have my guys go, "Man, you've been around a long time, huh?" I remember saying to a kid, because it was kind of like condescending, I said, "Yeah, I have." And I said, "I've seen your act." I go, "You got nothing to worry about." You'll be, you know. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, I don't think you have to worry about being around a long time. Oh, fuck, you know. Tom, thanks for being on, man. Great.
Dom, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing it.
Tom Dreesen, give him a hand. Come on, get up. Thank you, everybody. See you
Look
next
at
week.
This, a standing ovation. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
you believe this?
Thank you. Be
These
seated.
people, what a crowd.
Thank you.
Good to see you, that we still draw here.